Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to
Queridos
this new
alumnos, en este
conference
día tan
today.
especial,
And
queremos
with
recordarles a
this
todos ustedes que son el tesoro
new
más grande del mundo.
guest
Su
here
sonrisa.
at UGM Coatzacoalcos. And today we have a very interesting topic and very interesting talk to discuss about different things and situations. Well, and let me give a little brief about this important person today that we have online. Okay, so this is Dr. Paniel Reyes Cárdenas, uh, Mexico, 1981. Was awarded his MPhil and PhD in philosophy by the University of Sheffield, United Kingdom. In his PhD thesis, has researched the place of scholastic realism in Pursus Pragmatis philosophy under the supervision of Professor Christopher Hookway and Steve Mackin. Though Paniel's approach is centered in the pragmatist tradition, he has a wide range of philosophical interests. Paniel has published papers on philosophy of mathematics, metaphysics, medieval philosophy, philosophy of religion, and German idealism. Wow. Paniel has ample participation in academic conferences in many different countries and is founder of the Peers Latin American Society. After a spell as postdoctoral fellow in the University of Nottingham under the guidance of Jonathan Talent and Jules Holroyd, Paniel joined as lecturer and researcher in UPAEP, People's Autonomous University of Puebla State, Puebla, Mexico, where he's chair of philosophy of language and medieval philosophy. Paniel is part of the National Council for Research of Mexico, awarded SNL-1 for his research work as a junior scholar. Paniel was awarded as an honorary researcher by the Department of Philosophy at the University of Sheffield in 2017. Paniel has published Scholastic Realism, Oxford, Peter Lang, 2018, and Ideas in Development, Newcastle upon Tyne, Cambridge Scholars, 2018. Okay, so welcome, Dr. Paniel Reyes. It's a pleasure that you are here today with us, and I'm really happy and very glad that you share all this knowledge with us, with these students. That let me tell you that these are the one of the best students at college right now. So I hope they enjoy this talk. Okay, with you, everybody here. Okay, so let's start, and everybody pay attention.
Okay, thank you ever so much, Samael. That was a very kind introduction. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy for the invitation. So I'll give a word of thanks to Alejandra Moreno, who extended me this nice invitation, along with Ernesto Hernandez. Thank you both of you for the kind invitation, and thank you, Samael, for your very kind introduction. Well, the title of my talk today is English language and transferable skills. And the point of the presentation is not a very, as it were, academic point. I'm trying to give a rather informal talk, so that we could, interact with each other. By overall underlying my personal experience as a person who lives in a bilingual space. So the first part of the talk will be a general, clarification of what transferable skills mean. And second part of the talk will be a more specific, personal like a space of conversation. So I will share some personal experience, and I will give, like the opportunity to interact, explaining how these skills have been relevant to me as first as a student when I was in the UK, And then, you know, along in the process of my academic career, but also my personal life. Because one of the things I want to share with you today is that learning another language, and particularly English, because English is the vernacular language in the world at the moment, it is not only a thing we do to improve our careers. Of course we do it because it's part of an, you know, it's an important way to enter the world conversation, the global conversation, but also it's important at a personal level because it gives you skills for life. And to me, that's the most important thing, you know, like how you can flourish as a human being. You know, it's important to flourish in our jobs. It's important to have a good career. But the most important thing is to have a good life, of course. And that's why I studied philosophy at the end, because you can imagine philosophy is probably not not as money oriented as other careers. Anyway, so yes, that's what I will do now. So let me, first things first, clarify the concept of transferable skills. So, you know, when we think about, well, first and foremost, it's important to explain why I've chosen the English language as a topic for this conversation. And well, the particular reason is because the English language at this very moment is the language that the global economy, the global intercultural interaction uses. So it's the vernacular at the moment. But of course, the English language can be spoken in very many different ways. You know, there are different accents. I actually am trying to speak very slowly because I wonder, I suppose that my accent is not very familiar for you. So this is just a tiny example because my accent is from the north of England. But some people can find it difficult to follow if they have this accent. But of course, you know, the same happens for every other accent of the English language. So it's just a tiny proof that the English language is a transcultural language. We could say the same Spanish. Spanish is a transcultural language. The Spanish of Spain is very different from the Spanish of Venezuela. It's very different from the Spanish of Argentina. So of course, you can imagine that the same happens with the English language. And this is important to acknowledge because it helps us to understand that we have, in order to learn a new language, what we want to do is transcend, cross cultural barriers. So the first lesson to learn when we talk about a vernacular language of the whole world is to think about the transcendence, the breaking of the borders and barriers between different cultures. So we have to be willing to cross different cultures and try to understand and open ourselves to understand different cultures when we learn a new language. This is not only said by me, it has been said by many important, you know, authors of the literature on languages and culture in history. And from the top of my head, I can say I do remember a phrase that the very important, one of the most important writers of the German tradition, of the German literary tradition, Wolfgang Goethe used to say, nobody knows his own culture, nobody knows his own language until learns another language. Nobody understands his own culture until has to cross his own cultural borders. And this is a very interesting aspect of our talk today, because when we want to learn another language, when we want to acquire the skills to communicate in another language, we also have to understand not only the words, but the mindset of that culture. So that's the first important thing I wanted to tell you. But this is not the first time that a language has become an important way of communicating between different cultures. Let's think about the medieval times. You know, in the Middle Ages, Latin was the international language, wasn't it? The universities in the world were born with this vernacular language. Latin was the lingua franca, as we call it today. It was everybody who wanted to have a university education. It was needed to cross the border and connect with a cross-cultural system of beliefs. So this is not a new situation. There's different times and different in history, in different moments in history, that we can see how the learning of a vernacular language helps us to not only cross our borders, but also take our own culture to other spaces. That's why I call this talk a bilingual space. But it could be trilingual, or it could be multilingual. We could once we open ourselves to another cultural space, then we transcended a limitation of our own personal space, and we started to make a communication, a way of communicating with others that is able to keep transcending barriers. And this is important because many of us, of course, who are listening to this talk, perhaps their mother tongue is not English, but it is perhaps Spanish, most likely Spanish, because Coatzacoalcos is in Mexico. And my invitation is to realize that once we crossed a cultural border and we try to excel in the English language, we don't have to stop ourselves there. We can open ourselves to further new languages and culture. So through English, we can transcend these barriers of languages and try to learn yet another language and yet another language and be open to yet another culture. And I remember I had a friend, one of my best friends, perhaps he's listening to this talk. His name is Vlad. He's from Romania. And I do remember that we had this conversation many times back in the day when we were in England. And one of the things he used to say to me is that, once you excel and you become bilingual, some kind of chip activates in your brain, and then suddenly you start to think as a person who can transcend these barriers, and you're not content or happy with just having a second language. You want to have a third language, you have to have a fourth language, etc. Well, this was about the concept of what a vernacular language or a lingua franca means. The other important thing I wanted to share with you today
Hello?
Still listening? Sorry?
Yeah, a little, but at the beginning it was like you were stuck.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Is it okay now?
Yeah, it's better.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
So I carry on. Sorry about that. It's my connection that is not very good.
No problem.
Anyway, okay. So the point was this: skills, as you know, are abilities or capabilities that we can have. Of course, many different people have different skills. Like For example, when I was a child, I realized that I wasn't very skilled at football, but perhaps I was a bit better skilled for other sports like basketball. So we have like we're different people, and we have a different disposition with our skills, with our abilities. But once we have an ability and we try to improve in that ability, we make that ability part of our social interaction. So, for example, if I'm good at basketball, then the way to improve, the way I can have to improve my ability as a basketball player is to become part of a team and start training with other people, etc. So bring any skill you can think of. The way of improving a personal ability, an individual ability or capability, is to put this skill into the social use, is to put it socially out there and interact with other people through your skill. So in principle, we could say every skill is a transferable skill, because every skill we have helps us to communicate with other people. Now, however, some of our skills are relevant and helpful across different areas of social life, or professional life, or education, etc. So different aspects of social life are connected or better approached if we have some skills that are transferable across all these areas of life. So, of course, when you, for example, want to apply for a job, what you do is you normally try to, put across or put forward to other people what kind of skills you have that will help you to excel at that job. And although I have said already that every skill whatsoever is transferable, some skills are more transferable than others. So I have a list of 9 skills I was thinking about while preparing this talk. And these skills, are transferable skills. So let's talk about them very briefly. The first of them is teamwork. One important transferable skill is how to learn. How can we learn to work in a team, in a group of people? And this is very interesting, because sometimes we say, by default, we think we are good at working at teams, and we realize we're not so good at working at teams when we are in a team. So it's like the person who says, "Oh, I love humanity, but I just don't like humans. I just don't like people." And most of us, we say we love teamwork. I just don't like the teams. I just don't like to work with other. To put across my abilities in a group of people that are not suited to understand how good I am, etc. Well, teamwork is an ability that can be improved significantly by learning another language. Because learning a second language, learning a different language, in this case, English language, will entail that you will make a lot of mistakes. And the person who is making a tandem with you while you learn another language has to make a team with you. Learning a different language is an important social activity. It's an important way to transcend our cultural barriers and try to, make a team with another person or another set of persons. For example, just like you, when you're doing your university career or your university courses on languages, you have to be willing to accept that you don't master the language yet. And while this happens, when you recognize that you're not mastering the language, you put across what you know about the language or what you're willing to explore of the language by letting yourself participate with others, and you divide the tasks. So, for example, when I say, "Oh, I like to," I like to have a person to, to exercise my conversation in English, for example. Yeah? So a way of doing that is when we do like tandem talking. So when we find a person to tandem, so for example, from another country, nowadays is easier than before because we have these ways of communicating, by conference call. Maybe we can exercise talking in English with a person from Russia, for example, or from a person from South Africa, let's say, whatever country you like. So this is teamwork, because in order to prepare your conversation, you'll have a set of questions and you'll be willing to be corrected. You'll be willing to help other people in the areas where you're strong, where your language is strong, and willing to help yourself in aspects of your dominion of the language that you're not so confident about. And this is certainly a way of making a team with other people. So but if you're willing, for example, in an English class, in an English learning language group, then you must be willing to be, corrected by other people, but also the facilitator, the lecturer, the teacher has to be open to learn every day. I suppose Samael as well has learned a lot by preparing his classes and by, talking with you guys. So we think of ourselves not as the person who knows everything, which is the teacher, and the person who doesn't know anything, who is the student. No, we're a team, we're learning together. Of course, some of us are more trained than others, but in order to play as a team, we have to be willing to open our strengths to others and to be willing to be helped in our not so strong parts of our language. Another transferable skill that comes with learning a second language, in this case English, is leadership. Now, what is leadership? Well, leadership is, let's put it in this term. When we are in a group of people and we care about that group of people in a particular way, we have a common goal. When we have a common aim, what we do is we try to, orientate our efforts, our strength to achieve that goal. And in order to do that, we have to organize ourselves. And the leader is the person who has this ability to help the group organizing itself, finding the strengths of some and putting into the service of the community. So leadership definitely is something that enters the skills that we need to learn a second language, because we also have to have a goal in mind. Our inquiry into learning a different language has to have as an aim to master the language. But there's no point in our learning a second language where we say, oh, now I have a perfect dominion of English. I have 100% of English, or I have 100% of Italian, or I have 100% of, Portuguese. So no, because nobody has 100% in any language. It's very funny when people put in the CV or resume, or however you call it, as like languages. And some people put 80% German, 20% Italian. Like, how do you know? If you'll have to know the 100% in order to have these funny percentages. Like, nobody dominates 100% the language. because a language is a dynamical thing that is always changing. So, and you're always learning. So there's no point in time when you can say, oh, I don't need to learn English anymore because I fully dominate the English language 100%. That's not true. And this consciousness, this realization that you are always a learning subject is a step towards leadership, because you become a conscious, a controlled subject of your own learning. And because you are conscious of your need and your needs to, improve in the language, you can be helpful to others because you'll know where you are. So this takes me to the next transferable skill this time, which is personal motivation. So an important thing in learning a second language is that you feel motivated to learn it. And of course, with English, we can have a different number of motivations. We can have many ways of connecting with other people by transfer our own skills, by showing our motivation to learn another language. In my case, for example, my main motivation to learn the English language was because I was already in England on the first place, and in the second place because I wanted to interact with the expert on the field, academic field I was looking for. But in order to achieve that goal, I needed to, make changes that are not only academic. So, for example, I changed cultures. I came from Mexico to England, and I have to, be willing to learn a new culture. And this is important to know because, sometimes some people think they will, master a second language or a different language or a different culture, but they're not fully willing to open themselves to other cultures. So, for example, imagine that I am a Mexican. I love my Mexican food. I love my Mexican, television. I don't know, whatever you like. My Mexican family, etc., etc. And I travel to another country to do my studies, let's say. And this is a bit of just an example, but I also sharing a little bit of my own experience with this. So if I love my Mexican food, I love my Mexican culture, I love my Mexican sense of humor, etc., etc., and then I come and live in another country, and I don't want to let it go. I just want to eat my Mexican food, have my Mexican entertainment. I only need from this country the academic knowledge. Well, maybe I could, I could obtain what I need without opening myself to another culture, but it will be a painfully more slow process. Because learning another language is not only about learning how to say the words in another language. It's understanding how other people think. And clearly, they don't think the same way as I think because they have a different sense of humor. They have a different temperament. They have a different approach to the same things in life, etc. So this is a very important step. Whatever is our motivation to learn English, we need to be willing to understand that there's different ways of approaching life through a different culture. And this case, in my case, was the Northern English culture. And I felt that in my case, for example, I went to England to study my academic studies, theoretical studies, purely theoretical studies, which is philosophy. But for me, I realized that I needed to, in order to express my philosophical ideas, I didn't only need to learn the words of the philosophical concepts. I also needed to understand the culture how people express themselves. In my case, my motivation was very strong because I had two options. Either involve yourself in the culture, involve yourself in the place, learn to communicate yourself effectively, or come back to your country and have the other options available. But I was motivated to take the first option, the former. So what I did, my personal motivation was very strong. So what I did, it was like, I'm gonna, try to enter in every different aspect of the life of the place, and my own way of, plunge myself into that culture was to find a part-time job. So the first thing I did, not knowing the language, not knowing the everyday words, was to try to immerse myself. So what I did, especially in the first month I was there, was I did find a very demanding job in a restaurant in town, in the city center in Sheffield, and the first few weeks were terrible for me because it was a huge undertaking. For me, it was very difficult because sometimes the local accents are very different to the academic accents, and I will not understand immediately what people mean by a word or another, but I couldn't ask for them, to repeat all the time because I was serving in a job. So I needed to be quick and resilient and to learn to interpret people quickly and to react positively, and to be resilient when I was making mistakes. I did many mistakes. I'm not going to share them all now, but some of them were very funny. But it doesn't matter. The important thing that you learn is to be humble and to don't forget the aim, why you want to learn this second language. Another important transferable skill you could learn by learning a second language is organization. You have to be disciplined and organized with your time. Time is a limited resource, always. We always struggling everywhere we are to manage our time. But of course, when you are living in a different culture or you're trying to open yourself to a different culture, you realize that the time management and the discipline to manage your time changes according to the demands. So this is another skill you learn. And you also need to be motivated enough to try to, organize your time in a suitable way. So of course, this means that you'll have to make sacrifices. So for example, if you're not good at waking up early in the morning, but you have an opportunity to improve your language skills by attending an activity early in the morning, then you have to discipline yourself and learn to get up early in the morning, etc. I could say a lot about this, but I won't stop. I know we want to have an interaction with our participants today, so I won't take much longer explaining these skills. Maybe I can share some of them, some details in the Q&A. Another important skill I want to bring to the conversation is the power of listening. This is important to know. We need to, in order to learn, in order to master a second language or cross our cultural borders, we need to be able to listen. And unfortunately, we live in a difficult time for people. People is not very willing to listen nowadays. Everybody, the social networks are very good because they give us a voice. We can speak in different forums. We can tweet. We can do all these different things, to express our beliefs, our opinions. But everybody's saying something now, and this becomes like a noise. Everybody wants to say what they think about everything. But what I see with this is that it's becoming more and more difficult to be able to listen to other people, and listen attentively. Because if we are quick to dismiss other people's opinions, even if we don't pay attention to them carefully, then we are lacking this transferable skill of listening. It's a sign that we're not having this skill very not
Can we hear us, Mr.
this
Reyes?
is obviously very important because I can hear you. Can you not hear me?
Yeah, I don't know. It got stuck a little, but now
I got
I
stuck
can hear
where?
you.
I was
30
talking about
seconds.
listening.
30 seconds ago. 30 seconds ago.
Okay. I'll get back to that. So I was talking about listening, and the Zoom platform wasn't let me to be listened. Anyway, so the point I wanted to put across was the following. We need, in order to cross our culture, our intellectual borders, our social borders, we need to learn to listen to other people. And this is very important. And I'm not talking only about how you pronounce the words. No, I'm talking about listening other people's emotions, feelings, beliefs, cultural stances, etc. As you may know, learning another language is not only about learning the words, it's also about learning the body language. It's also about learning the expressions, etc. Funny, just a funny anecdote. When I was in my first few years in the UK, and I will be, and if everything goes according to my plan, I will be having a year abroad in the US now, next year. As a Mexican, for example, I was very used to express my sense of affirmations and doing this with my finger, because some people in Mexico will do this. To say yes, we do this. But in other places, this is completely unfamiliar. They don't understand that by as a yes. They understand maybe you're tickling me or something like that. What is that? A worm? What is that? No? I don't get that. And it was funny because when I was in my first experiences in the UK, trying to communicate in everyday life with people, I knew that, and I had to be able to listen to other people's bodily expressions of confusion to learn that wasn't a correct way of expressing my affirmations. So it's just a funny fact, just to say something about body language, etc. Of course, there's some universal traits on human expression, but many of them are culturally bound. Okay, last skill. So I give time for people to talk. My analytical and research skills are improved by learning a second language, because one of the important things, like learning a second language, in my opinion, is like solving a problem. Why? I don't know if you're familiar with, mystery films or thrillers in the telly, in the television, or in films, but typical plot of a mystery series or a mystery episode is that there is a situation that is confusing, undetermined, And there's an intellectual effort to determine the situation and to be able to solve the crime or solve the mystery. Well, I think learning a second language, communicate effectively, both verbally and physically and culturally, in another cultural space, is like solving a problem, because initially you will find that there's an overwhelming amount of different interpretations and confusions between our ways of trying to communicate with others, etc. Even from the very basic things, like remember Tarzan and Jane, like me Tarzan, you Jane, right? It is this kind of expressions. Is it clear for everybody that doing this means no? I'm not sure. So it's an overwhelmingly confusing situation. And we're making intellectual efforts to analyze what works to communicate and what doesn't work to communicate. So the point I wanted to put across is just this, that your intellectual problem-solving skills get really, are put to use by learning a second language. Okay, I'll stop there because I want to listen to you. I'm talking about listening and I'm using all the time. So I'll stop here. And I want to say thank you to UGM Campus Central, UGM Campus Central, Coatzacoalcos.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Reyes. We have some questions on Facebook.
Yes.
Okay. Well, one of the first questions here is, I'm reading. What is the best way to learn to interact in English? I feel good in listening, but for me, it's a little hard to talk. And the question is, I repeat, what is the best way to learn to interact in English?
Okay, well, so who is asking these questions? Do you have the
Juan
name
Pablo.
of the person?
Juan Pablo.
Juan Pablo. Okay. Is he a student of UGM, maybe?
I don't know. I don't know him, but maybe.
It's no problem. It could be
Yeah.
anybody. So it's just saying, like, Juan Pablo, thank you for your question. So Juan Pablo, like I said before, my opinion is the following. I think we're all different people, just like you said. For me, it's easier to listen than to talk. For some other people, it's easier to talk than to listen, of course. Or sometimes it's easier to read than to listen to people. Because, for example, for me, the French language is very easy to read, but impossible to listen, because I find it really hard to understand when people speak fast. So everybody is different, just like we said before. And so therefore, hence, there is no universal way of answering to that question. There's no one only way to answer your question. What I could share with you is what works for me. For me, when I see that it's difficult to express and talk sometimes, I try to get out of my comfort zones by exposing myself to trying to speak with people who are, are proficient in that language, and try to, cross one task at a time. So, for example, one way of doing this is finding a tandem person, somebody who is willing to have a conversation with you. And you could say, so for example, for me, it's very difficult to talk. So I'll try, but I'm good for listening. So how do I connect my two skills? I want to improve this skill. I have this one very good. I don't have this one. Well, I can do this, for example. If I will have a tandem conversation with a person who knows about certain topic, I'll try to listen to materials of conversation. So, for example, read some information about let's say, a medical topic. What are bacteria? What are viruses? That is something we talk a lot about these days. So if I want to have a conversation with this person who knows about this topic, I will use my skill of listening or reading, and I will learn about that and prepare my conversation. Once I prepare, I try to speak out loud and make sense to that person that is proficient in that topic. And that way, the person who is, knowledgeable about that topic will be able to give you good feedback and help you to express yourself in ever better ways. I hope that makes sense to you. But what I'm trying to say is that if you are strong in one skill and not so strong in another, try to connect them too. Try to make them work together. And that way, your weaknesses become connected to your strengths. And then that way you can solve that problem. Thank you, Juan Pablo.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And I want to hear some of the students here. Well, I can see one of them, Carlos Daniel. Hello, Carlos. Are you here?
Yes, hello.
Hi, hello.
How's it going?
Hey, it's going. Do you have any questions to Mr. Reyes here?
Yeah,
Paniel Reyes?
Reyes, I have a question. I want to know how long did it took for you to learn English?
Well, it's not an easy
Very good question.
Very good question. Not an easy one, because I'll probably need another hour to tell you the whole story. But I cut the long story. I cut to the chase, like they say. I cut the long story short. Well, thank you, Carlos. Thank you. It took me a while, of course. It is as they say, I didn't learn overnight. It took effort and it took challenges. But there was a very intense period in my learning. Like I said to you, probably the most intense period I had in my life when I was learning English was the first 3 months after I arrived in England, because I had a very limited way of communicating myself in English, and I needed to improve, and it took a lot of effort during 3 months, in which I was very even physically tired of trying every day to learn new words and to expose myself to conversations and socialize even, even the relaxing spaces were learning spaces, because I wanted to go to the pub to socialize and listen to conversations, but that was the most tiring part. Is the relaxing part was the most tiring part, because it's not the same to listen to a conversation when you are talking one-to-one, like we are doing right now, as opposed to the moment where you are in a place that is crowded, everybody's talking at the same time. It's difficult to focus in one conversation at a time, and everybody's talking about different things. So socializing was a very, very demanding moment. I enjoy it. Don't get me wrong. I really like to go to the pub and have a beer and have a pint. I don't know if I should say this publicly, but but I love my beer. I love my pub time. I used to love to go to pubs, and it's very common. It's the way that people socialize in England. But of course, it was very tiring and demanding. So it took effort even to relax. Even the relaxing spaces were tiring. So for me, it took 3 to 4 months of intense interaction. I was very physically and mentally and emotionally tired, but I was pleased because it was for me like a crossing at a tipping point. So at some point things can be very demanding. But if you keep at it with discipline and try, and don't lose your aim, perhaps after a tipping point, it becomes easier and easier. So for me, that's my experience. It took me about 2 to 3 months of intense interaction with all the spaces available: work, school, university, even socializing, every aspect of life, even looking at the television. It used to be for me like a learning space, because I turn off programs and I didn't put like subtitles or anything. So if you could ask put yourself these tasks, and at some point it will become easier to understand after that tipping point. But of course, everybody has a different approach to things. There are different skills and different ways of, you do not demand yourself too much if you're feeling that this is becoming overwhelming. Try to one step at a time, but of course, but be disciplined, and you'll realize that if you keep at it and your motivation is strong, you'll be able to learn quickly and to cross that point where things become easier. I hope that helps, Carlos, Daniel.
Yes, Mr. Reyes. I appreciate your answer.
Thank you, Carlos. Good to see you.
You
Thank
too.
you, Carlos. Okay, anybody else? Okay, well, I would like to say that it was really interesting to hear that learning English. Well, the point that I get, the way I understood is that learning English is just the beginning to open other, how can I say, opportunities, chances to learn a new culture, different cultures, not only grammar and vocabulary and these kind of structures, but it's about learning your own language, other languages, and at the same time new cultures with um, I don't know, with new ways to understand life. To
Yes.
understand life. Yeah, it's kind
Yes.
of complex.
I totally agree.
It's complex.
Yes, Amael, I totally agree with you. Let me put you a very simple example. Like we have this, sometimes culturally, we have these unconscious ways of doing things. And it takes to be in a different culture to realize that we do things that way. So it's an opportunity for self-knowledge, of course. Yes. When I know that other cultures do things differently, then I become aware of how do I do things and how my culture does. And I say this because our Mexican culture is very strong, In Mexico, we have very powerful sort of set of values, social ways, etc. And sometimes we are very proud of them, but we don't realize that there's other ways to do things.
Yeah.
And when we give ourselves the opportunity to do that, we realize that our own ways can be improved. They're not necessarily the only ways to do things.
Of course, I agree completely. Thank you very much. And I don't know if there is somebody else here. Well, I don't think so. But
Uh,
oh,
Mr.
Carlos.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'd like another question to Mr. Reyes.
Of course.
I want to know what was your most embarrassing experience while learning English?
Oh dear. Carlos, that's a very. I don't know if I publicly can say this, but I'm not going to say the word, but I'll tell you what happened. I was working in a food in a food stall in the Christmas market back in there in Sheffield in year 2010. I remember, as if it was yesterday, because it was a very cold winter. And there was a confusion I had about one words that were very similar, but one of the words meant a donkey, and the other word meant the rear part of the person. And they're different words, but I was mistaking one for the other. So I found myself receiving customers and asking them if they wanted the rear part, the back part of my body, as opposed to a food that was called a donkey. So I'll leave it there to your imagination to figure out what word was that. But of course, there were two different words. I was saying something very offensive or very potentially embarrassing, and when I realized, I was red as an apple. So definitely very embarrassing moment, but also quite amusing, because these things happen, and you don't have to be too worried about them.
Okay, thank you for sharing. Okay, well, I'm gonna thank you for this interesting, very, very interesting and useful talk, and here in international talk. Thank you very much, Paniel Reyes Cárdenas. Okay, PhD. Thank you, students, and Alejandra, Ernesto. Thank you very much for being here, and I hope we can see you later, right? In another talk.
Of course, yeah. I'm very happy to be part of this invitation. Thank you very much indeed for setting up all the electronic, talk today. So, and of course, I'm very willing and happy to be back, to share more of these topics with you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Miss Alejandra. That's all.
Hoy, nuestras aulas están desocupadas, los pizarrones vacíos. En los patios ya no hay niños corriendo y en las canchas ya no hay jugadores. Hoy estamos lejos, quizá y separados uno de los otros. Para mañana, volver a estar juntos, abrazarnos, volver a estar unidos y sobre todo volver a tener nuestras puertas abiertas para ti. Hoy, nuestras aulas están desocupadas, los pizarrones vacíos. En los patios ya no hay niños corriendo y en las canchas ya no hay jugadores. Hoy estamos lejos, quizá y separados uno de los otros. Para mañana, volver a estar juntos, abrazarnos, volver a estar unidos